U.S. Lieutenant General retired Ben Hodges holds the Pershing Chair in Strategic Studies at the Center for European Policy Analysis, and he served as Commanding General in the United States Army in Europe. Hi, Ben.
Hey, Dan. Good morning.
It's always great to talk to you, sir. And, a lot has been happening in Ukraine. And tell me if your impression is the same as mine, but when you take a look at it from everything from OSCE Observer, mission ceasefire problems to arms shipments to an escalating chapter in fighting, it would appear we are entering a darker chapter.
Yeah, I think this is sort of the next phase of what's been going on now since their invasion of Ukraine and illegal annexation of Crimea. The overall strategic objective is not necessarily an invasion of Ukraine, but to undermine Ukraine and present Ukraine to the West as a failed state, so that there is no desire in the West to bring Ukraine into the EU or into NATO. So I think that's, and to make sure you've got this failed state, if you will, on its periphery of its frontier.
Right. Russia always denies. They denied that they were in Ukraine. They denied that they've supported the rebels. They've denied arms shipments. Now we have a new study that's just come out of weapons and ammunition used in the war, which shows Russia has been systematically fanning the conflict with arms shipments, according to a new report which was funded by the European Union and the German government. I sense you are not surprised by any of that, but it is a detailed, evidentiary-based report on arms shipments directly from Russian arms manufacturers into eastern Ukraine.
Yeah, Ray Charles could see that the Russians are all over this in Donbass as well as Crimea. I mean, it's Russian-led. There's no way that so-called separatists could sustain the level of ammunition expenditure, the technology, if these were just, guys putting stuff together in barns or in their mom's basement. So clearly state supported, state-led. And the OSCE, of course, brave women and men from 57 different countries, including Russia, their special monitoring mission has been prevented from observing the official border between Russia and Ukraine. And yet it's clear that we know about Russian leadership and involvement. The issue is, what will Germany and France in particular do about it?
What should they do about it?
Well, number one, they should put pressure on the Kremlin to live up to agreements, to respect international law. I think that Berlin is the only capital that can actually influence Kremlin behavior, but there is just significant reluctance to really put the screws on them through economic pressure and diplomatic pressure, because, there's gas and there's so many other issues linking Germany to Russia, and then there's a reluctance to hold them accountable. But that's what should be happening, instead of allowing this fairy tale that keeps coming out of the Kremlin that somehow, Ukraine is drawing us into this. It's Ukraine's the aggressor, and so on.
They've said that recently because Ukraine has now obtained these Turkish drones that are able to hit Russian positions, which have been, according to the Ukrainians, have been shelling very hard into Ukrainian positions. And sorry, I should say Russian rebel positions, because the Russians would deny that that's their artillery. But the Kremlin is saying that's a dangerous escalation, the use of drones by the Ukrainian army against those rebel positions.
Well, again, this is classic textbook Kremlin narrative shaping to put it on the Ukrainians, because Ukrainians are trying to defend themselves. And then the pathetic, really disgusting response of Germany and France was that, to test the Ukrainians for escalating what was going on. Instead of putting the pressure on the Kremlin to get things under control, they could stop it in the same day. Instead, the message that came out from Berlin and Paris was that somehow Ukraine was responsible for escalation. That's the narrative part that is so damaging, and frankly, it's just not right.
It's damaging. Is it dangerous? Because does it give a green light to Russia to go further?
Well, the Kremlin knows that nobody's going to really stop them. I mean, nobody's going to actually do anything to force them to stop the killing of Ukrainian soldiers, to respect Ukrainian sovereignty. They feel pretty confident that since they invaded 7 years ago, I mean, what has the West done? Nothing. NATO has gotten stronger, more prepared, but the Kremlin has felt no pain for anything they've done in Ukraine, with the exceptions of sanctions that were in place after this Malaysian airliner was shot down that killed over 100 Dutch citizens. Then that got sanctions, but none of the other stuff has really resulted in any punishment, if you will, for the Kremlin's illegal behavior.
You mentioned NATO. Russia has been kicked out of observer status in NATO. They were never a member of NATO. They've been accused of spying. So they were, to be clear, and I should clarify what I just said, they were asked to remove some of its members from the observer mission for spying in NATO, and then Russia withdrew fully from its observer status in NATO. What does all that mean?
Well, first of all, nobody would be surprised that members of the Russian delegation that were invited into NATO as part of the NATO Russia Council, which is this mechanism that's been in place for years to enable constant dialogue, face-to-face meetings and so on between the Russian Federation and NATO. Nobody's surprised that members of that delegation were doing things that they shouldn't have been doing. And so finally, the alliance said, okay, that's enough. You ate these guys, get them out of here. That's responsible behavior by the West, by NATO, to hold Russia accountable to international standards.
And then Russia fully withdrew.
Yeah, good. Get them out. And then, of course, that unfortunately results in the closing for some period of time of the NATO Information Center in Moscow. So, I mean, these are all things that the Kremlin is doing to affect the narrative. And of course, they have a domestic audience that they have to appeal to, that somehow Russia is being encroached upon by NATO, that Russia is being threatened on its periphery. And this feeds that Kremlin narrative for their own people.
Is there momentum, Ben, do you think, that is gaining now for Ukraine to join NATO? I talked to a lawyer friend of mine who does work in Ukraine, and he says a lot of people just now feel that they should push on with NATO membership, that there is no point in a long road to NATO, and that he believes that the West is probably warming to that idea, because the conflict is not going to end, and we may as well take Ukraine into NATO sooner than later.
Well, I don't agree with that. Of course, I would like to see Ukraine and Georgia be in the alliance, but there's some very important work that has to be done. This is not just about everybody agreeing that somebody gets to join the Rotary Club or the Lions Club. I mean, this is an alliance of 30 nations that's committed to the collective defense of all of its members, and so the decision to bring in other members, new members, has to be put within a strategic context. And what's missing right now is a strategy, a U.S. strategy, first of all, for the Black Sea region, and a NATO strategy for the Black Sea region that thinks about what do we want to accomplish here? What's the desired outcome? And it involves not just military, but information, economy, and diplomatic efforts as well. And so I think we've got to get the strategy right first, and also the United States, really, we need to normalize or have a normal bilateral relationship with Ukraine. Right now, I think people in Washington, if you say Ukraine, the first thing they think of is Giuliani and Hunter Biden's laptop and, Trump and that sort of thing. And I think we need to have a normal relationship that has all the different facets of a bilateral relationship, strengthen that, and then we can do the hard diplomatic work required to convince Germany, France, the Netherlands, Italy, that the alliance will be better with Ukraine in it.
Retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, always an honor to talk to you, sir, and thanks so much.
And thank you for the privilege.